Welcome, everyone, to the From the Shadows podcast. I'm your host, Shane Grove, and with me, as always, the man who can't handle his iPhone, but yet he still goes by super producer, Jason.
Greetings, everyone.
So, hey, it's kind of, before we introduce our guest, who I'm super excited about, like, Jason, what's going on around it? Like, we're under the lights, we're in front of the camera. Like, this is kind of big time, right?
This is a special episode here. Yeah, we are actually being filmed.
We're being filmed.
Yeah, I will let you fill our audience in on the details on that.
I don't think I'm allowed to say any details.
What?
But we're being filmed by our good friend Phil Garrett is here.
Yep.
From Escape from Death Block 13.
There you go.
Assistant director. Is that and producer? Is that what we?
Yep.
And all around great guy.
Yes.
From the number one action movie of the year.
Yep.
Escape from Death Block 13. Did I say that enough times? I don't know. I'm obligated.
Yes. Yeah. You need to say that and plug that in whenever you can.
So we're doing it. We're doing a kind of Phil's here to film us for a kind of a cool documentary on Georgia Bigfoot.
Yes.
And of course, we'll tell all the fans when it comes out, as long as our parts don't get cut. I don't know. Phil's done an awful lot of work. I don't think he's going to cut us.
Yeah, Phil, he probably was like, I didn't sign up to have that little beep go off every now and then.
Well, I'm just glad you trimmed your beard for the show.
Ooh. All right, man.
So we're going to bring on our guest because our guest is I've been begging, pleading for this gentleman to come on the show for probably almost since we started. And like every date I tried to get in high school, I kept getting put off. Okay, I kept getting put off. But
that's a heck of an analogy.
Finally, I wore him down.
You wore him down.
Just like, it's like I feel like I'm going to my senior prom. I finally wore him down. So joining us is, I guess, giant chaser, world-renowned Jim Vieira.
Yeah, I guess I won't file a sexual harassment suit on you, but
thank you very much.
Yeah, it won't be the Me Too moment. But thanks for being persistent. Actually, I was on sabbatical. I take when I write, I just tune out the world for like a year or something like that. But thank you for having me on. And yeah, actually, in one of our episodes, me and my buddy Hugh, we knock on somebody's door and I quip to him, I feel like I'm from the Church of Giantology, and then we laugh.
The Church of Giantology. That's fantastic. Well, so for our guests that don't, because I remember you from, you and your brother Bill had a show called Search for Lost Giants on the History Channel. I think we were talking before, it's been 6-7 years ago now. So that's where I first kind of learned about you. And then you've appeared on numerous other people's shows, including Megan Fox, right? Mm-hmm. We talked about that. We had a nice little chat about Megan Fox. Nice little
chat about that.
Yeah. And another guy, Jim, I want you to feel special, but also know that I've also been trying to get Josh Gates on the show too. So, in my top three were you, Josh Gates, and Wes from Sasquatch Chronicles. Now, Wes and I have become buddies, but he doesn't have time to come on the show yet. But so I've got you. You're the first one off the list. I think Josh Gates is big league in us. I think he's more than a senior prom date. I think so. But yeah. So you've been in the public eye with this, I don't know, I don't want to call it obsession, but this determination to let us know about the history of giants in America.
Yeah. I'll give you a little background on myself. I studied economics at the University of Massachusetts. I went to UMass. I always had an abiding interest in archaeology and anthropology. My father was kind of a struggling pipe fitter in the shipyards of Boston, and he told my brother and I to study business and finance and economics so we wouldn't be in the same situation as him. So we We studied economics. We minored in Japanese at UMass. We were geared in that direction. This was the 80s, like the era of stagflation. But if the truth be told, that wasn't my passion at all. I could give a rat's ass. In fact, if I had to work in an office, I'd hang myself. So I continued to, I not only studied archaeology, anthropology, and history and geology, I'm kind of obsessed with mysticism and esoteric sources like Edgar Cayce, Rudolf Steiner, the Theosophists. I do comparative analysis of religious documents, and I've met with shamans and wisdom keepers, and have done lots of ceremonies. So taken all together, I tried to take an objective look at the past and, just present evidence without theorizing too much. And my brother and I did Search for the Lost Giants. Then we did several more specials on the Lost Colony Roanoke for the History Channel. We got a third special put on hold when the coronavirus hit. Beyond that, I've been on Ancient Aliens and Josh Gates' show, like you said, and, continue to write books and do tours and stuff like that. So, it's an all-consuming obsession, my search to piece together human origins and to not be dogmatic or, narrow-minded about it. And that's its own set of discussions about the dynamics that exist within science and the alternative universe as well.
And all I do is deliver mail. I don't know what, I mean, how do you even...
He leads a fascinating lifestyle.
Say,
I love that. I can immerse myself in research like that and be happy.
This is all the stuff that I grew up thinking I would love to do. Yep. And I mean, you're in it.
Yeah, you're doing it.
I love it.
Full time.
So what got you really started on the subject of giants then? Like, what was the eureka moment that you're like, okay, something's going on here and I need to do some research?
Absolutely. I do have a Da Vinci Code moment that I will tell you about. First of all, we're avid hikers. I've been out here in Western Mass for about 30 years, and we live right next to a large state forest in Hawley, Massachusetts, and we'd hike all the time. And my brother and I started to find these structures like serpent walls with terminating ends that were 2 tons in weight, with carved eyes and undulating bodies and things like that, and all kinds of anthropomorphic forms and things that look like they were Native American and not colonial. And the mainstream narrative is that Native Americans do not build with stone in New England, although in other parts of the country they certainly did. So I kind of pushed back against that idea and try to gather data through town and county histories and early colonial accounts of pre-existing walls, which obviously would be native in construction. So that drew me in, and I spent a lot of time studying, mountains of 1,000-page town and history documents. And when I was reading the town history of Deerfield in Massachusetts here, about a half an hour away, I stumbled across George Sheldon, former state senator, amateur archaeologist, the head of prestigious Deerfield Academy, mentioned that he saw an 8-foot skeleton with a head as big as a peck basket and double rows of teeth unearthed in Deerfield. And it was examined by Dr. Stephen Williams, who taught anatomy at Berkshire College and came from a lineage of physicians. So it really struck me as odd, like, this is a credible person, former state senator, along with an accredited physician, measuring a stationary object and coming up with this description that is utterly bizarre: 8 foot tall, massive jaw, massive skull, and double rows of teeth. So I said, what the hell is this? And I started to read through Middleborough, Mass, Martha's Vineyard, and I would, 7'8", double rows of teeth, jawbone so big it would fit over the face of the finder. Martha's Vineyard, 7.5 foot tall skeleton, double rows of teeth, massive jawbone, and on and on. And in fact, I would find the same descriptions from one coast to the other, all the way to Catalina Islands. in publications like the Scientific American, the Carnegie's literature, the Smithsonian's ethnology reports. So within these voluminous academic documents in an era of inefficient communication all over the United States, you have descriptions of giant skeletons with specific anatomic anomalies like double rows of teeth, massive jaw bones, and huge skulls. So what I did, often by respected scientists, so what I did was, gather a lot of information, and I ended up doing a TED Talk where I discussed this, and I didn't even make a case. I just laid it out like, isn't this interesting? Wow, look what I found when I was looking for something else. And it ended up being the number one watched TEDx talk in the world for a couple of weeks, and then it was taken down because it was considered, scientifically invalid. So that is how I came about studying this strange subject.
Well, so I want to ask now, because I think people are going to say, well, they're talking about giants. Okay, we're not talking about like 30-foot tall giants. We're talking about people or beings that were around, because now 7-8 foot tall people, you can turn on the TV and the Cavaliers got a guy that used to play for the Celtics, he's 7'6", okay, and he looks even amongst the guys that are 6'8", 9", he looks huge, but back then the average person was, I think I heard John Smith, who was aboard the Mayflower, was 5'1". Okay. So if he comes across people 7 foot tall, 8 foot tall, they're going to seem like, 10, 15 foot tall people. They're really going to seem like giants. So we're not really, we're talking about giants in the sense that they shouldn't have, people shouldn't have been that big or weren't known to be that big at the time, but they're not.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
I understand your question, and it's asked frequently. First of all, the number of 7 and 8 foot skeletons unearthed from Native American burial mounds by Smithsonian scientists and other scientists is of a far greater proportion than the incidence of over 7 foot people in today's population. So it represents an anthropological mystery. Why were there so many giant Native rulers and leaders from Patagonia all the way up to Virginia? The other thing is that one of the arguments is that, the Spanish explorers, they were like 5'2", and the native population was, generally 5'8" to 5'10", which is true in the general population. But all the explorers you can name, from Magellan to De Soto to Vespucci, chronicled encountering 8.5, sometimes 9 foot tall or taller native chiefs that, kind of boggle the imagination, like teenagers on their knees towered over the men. It wasn't just like these guys were a couple inches taller than us. And essentially what we've established, like myself and my co-author Hugh Newman and other researchers like Greg Little, Andrew Collins, Ross Hamilton, is that there was an elite class, a shamanic class, if you will, that was so extraordinarily huge. It wasn't that they were just fed more than the general population. There was a genetic component to it. And we have many accounts of 9, 10, 11 foot tall skeletons as well. I'm not going to tell you that I've DNA tested a 12 foot tall skeleton, but there is plenty of literature out there and documentation of utterly out of normal range and bizarrely tall skeletons being unearthed. So I guess we'll get into what my theory is about where these beings came from. And I believe it's a story of genetic intervention. But this is much more than a couple NBA guys. This is like burial mounds that had 8 and 10 skeletons that were all over 8 foot tall, which is, absolutely unheard of in normal society and of normal Homo sapien dimensions.
Yeah, and yes, that part I do understand. I just don't want people to think we're talking about 30 foot tall, 30 foot tall people, because then they're going to be like, what? That doesn't, although you may surprise me and say that you've unearthed or somebody's unearthed the 30, but take that,
interesting.
But take that, so to take that first incident that caught your attention. So what was there people that disputed that, account by the former politician and the doctor, or was it just there and it was just kind of lost to time?
Yeah, there's like a cottage industry of pseudo skeptics out there that aren't really interested in objective analysis of evidence. They're kind of like, I don't know, trying to get back at somebody from dumping their books in high school or something, or their brains don't make enough dopamine. They like get off on being intellectually superior. And then you have true believers who are also sometimes immune to logic and reason and can get drawn into conspiracies that have no basis in reality, like the QAnon garbage or whatever. So, I try to meet in the middle and not really have an agenda. But I found that, entering the academic world, you ruffle a lot of feathers when you're from another discipline and you basically start talking about things that don't fit in with the prevailing paradigm. And I just, I got a lot of pushback. Like, I was told that all these accounts were like hoaxes or mastodon bones or animal bones, and just an amalgam of lame, and dismissive ideas about it. Where, I would point out that how can you have these accounts of double rows of teeth, in all these town histories by, the local historian collects all the stories, and it's on page 643, obscurely buried, about this anatomic anomaly that's very specific, and you find it all around the country, even in the Smithsonian's own ethnology reports. How do you dismiss that? How can you even make an argument against that? And then the burial mounds had artifacts of the time, Native American artifacts within context. These aren't mastodon bones. These aren't animal bones. They are a documentation of a stationary object within a burial mound or an archaeological excavation. So I just made those points. But, you get looped in. It's like, I don't mind somebody disagreeing with me, but I find that, there are often many professionals who don't just try to dismiss you. They denigrate you for being naive and stupid for engaging in these topics, right? And I think there's a lot of people who they push back against that. They feel like these subjects don't get properly evaluated, and they are ripe to get drawn into conspiracies with no basis in reality because they don't feel like anybody's really looking at this stuff, if you know what I'm saying. So there's an odd dynamic here that I like to address. But to answer your question, it was generally accepted that these are like hoaxes and these are just figments of people's imagination, which makes no sense.
So that was like the general. So as you went further and further along and started uncovering all this documentation, then you were getting pushback from academia saying these people were mistaken. They didn't know what they were seeing, and stop wasting your time, basically, is what you're saying. Yes? I mean, that's... Yeah. And if you watched our show in episode 2, we follow up on an 8'6" skeleton that was found in the Ozarks at Staleville, Missouri. So we go there, we find the cave, we find the location when the skeleton came up. We talk to the relatives of the person who unearthed it. We found photographs of a 6-foot guy laying next to this 8.5-foot skeleton. We talked to the grandfather of the guy who, or the in reverse, the grandson of the guy who uncovered it, found the doctor's office where it was laid out by University of Missouri archaeologist. And we found the account where they boxed it up and they shipped it to the Smithsonian, right? So that was in 1833. Front page of the Staleville Ledger, front page of the St. Louis Dispatch. We have photographic evidence. We have the original account. We have the specific measurements. We have the documentation that it goes to the Smithsonian. We take it to Todd Disotell, an evolutionary anthropologist at the University of or New York University, who was on the show with us, and we just checked in with him, and he didn't know what to make of it. But I made the point that you can't tell me that this skeleton was not shipped to the Smithsonian. And with the Smithsonian claims that its tallest skeleton is a 6'3" Sioux
Indian that had acromegaly, pituitary gigantism, which is a disease condition. In fact, their scientists I uncovered found over 27.5 to 8.5 foot tall skeletons buried within, documented within their own ethnology reports. And you say, how the hell can this be? I'll quickly say that Dr. Hrdlicka was a zealous racist lunatic who was the head of anthropology for the Smithsonian from like 1900 to 1940. And he was wrong about a whole boat of things. He thought that humans did not enter North America before 2000 BC. He had a bunch of incorrect theories, and he was the one who said giants and no more. He did not address that his own scientists found it. He portrayed people who brought evidence of giants as religious nuts or crackpots or hoaxers or whatever. So you have, and back then anthropology was bizarrely racist. It was all like pre-eugenics, Nazi eugenics stuff. And it was denigrating Native American people, like anything that defined their civilization as sophisticated or memorable was dismissed. So you have a bunch of weird undercurrents going on. But the moral of the story is these ideas were just dismissed regardless of the data that was presented. And so I felt like I'm just not going to sit back and take shit from a bunch of assholes, you know what I mean, that I'm going to push back.
Right.
And, I'm from the wrong side of the track. So where I'm from, if you run your mouth, you get your teeth knocked down your fucking throat. You know what I mean? So.
Right. So, hey, Jim, what do you think the academia, especially the Smithsonian, what made them sign on to making all these extreme efforts to deny things that they've taken and to this day that are still not available to be researched anymore? I mean,
yes.
Why would they do that?
Well, see, I'm not a believer in, that there's this boardroom of white guys smoking cigars and hiding information. There's definitely conspiracies in this world. There's political assassinations, MLK, John and Bobby Kennedy. If you got a brain and you look at 9/11, Building 7 and thermite, you don't have to be a crackpot to, read all the literature from engineers and architects and things like that. The thing is, you have to view these things on a case-by-case basis. But I do feel like what you're up against, what we're all up against, is the human ego. Nobody likes to admit they're wrong. There's so much cognitive dissonance out there. And now because of social media especially, everybody's preferences are weaponized. So everybody's in a cult of the left or the right or whatever your thing is. It's like religion and politics are totally polarized. Instead of objective evaluation of policy positions, it becomes, you're on my team or you're not, which is, that's not my cup of tea. But I do feel like, I think there's some dark and insidious forces on the earth. There's no question about it. We're in an age of darkness and not light. And I think there are institutions that actively control and filter out information. But at the same time, I just think that there are, like I know myself because I am friends with so many professionals. I've read all the literature in anthropology and archaeology and all the theories. And I just feel you get indoctrinated into a way of thinking that does not encourage looking at these things. So when you have findings that, like I'm talking about, they were considered an aberration. There was nobody motivated to put it all together. Because I'll quickly say that the idea that giants existed is like, it's antithetical to the idea of evolution, right? So, but I would say, no, you can have coexisting realities. You can have uniformitarianism and catastrophism in geology, right? You can have an understanding of the growth of human society, but you also can have a lost civilization that was destroyed in the cataclysm. And in anthropology, you can have natural evolution, which I'm sure we all agree upon, but a genetic intervention that occurred at some point in history, like if you read the Sumerian texts of the Bible or any of the religious or traditional descriptions of how humans were created, giants are created in the same way. They are created through some form of genetic manipulation by these strange quote unquote gods who show up all around the planet. Now, I never believed any of this, and I was kind of a dismissive skeptic around the idea of genetic intervention or extraterrestrial sources. But I got to tell you, the same strange amphibious gods who are also hermaphroditic, they're all androgynous, show up in prehistory, create humans, teach them the arts of civilization, created the giants, and destroyed them in a flood. And you're like, whoa, but Viracocha in Peru, androgynous, amphibious, creator god. Fuxi in China, Oannes in Samaria, on and on and on. The entire world is littered with these beings that are iconographically memorialized in statues and in literature and in description with the specific anomalies I talk about. And I don't want to get long-winded, but this whole story, when you look at it, is like amazingly specific and ubiquitous.
Well, you just blew our minds. Jason's, got on my shirt here a little bit. so well, let's go in a little bit further then about that. That action that took place, the genetic intervention, and how you feel that took place. Obviously, it had to take place worldwide, more than one place.
Yeah, there had to have been a cabal of people that were in charge that had to agree upon this.
I
think he's talking about some people that came from somewhere else.
I'll give you the. Well, first of all, Robert Temple is one of the most brilliant academics I've ever encountered. He is a professor of history and science, and he wrote The Serious Mystery in the 70s. And basically, the guy is, if you've ever read his books, there are certain authors who are so phenomenally thorough and intelligent. It's like depressing. It's like studying Einstein's scientific proofs and just really like, I could never attain that level. It's kind of intimidating. But anyways, Temple lays out the story about these amphibious gods who showed up. And he pinpoints in Mali, Africa, the isolated Dogon tribe was visited in the 1930s by a pair of French anthropologists. And Olga Matelli, the blind elder of the Dogon people, told the anthropologists, who they wrote books about this, that there were beings from the star system of Sirius who were amphibious. They were fish-like and human-like beings, that a blend of both, that came to teach the arts of civilization, advanced astronomy, and these beings were hermaphroditic. They were androgynous. This is all laid out. The iconography of the statues talks about it. The French anthropologists relay the message. It's very specific. And they knew about Sirius B, the binary white dwarf star that was not understood to exist until the telescopes understood it, like, I don't know when the hell it was, in the 40s or the 50s or something like that. So there was a lot of pushback to Temple's idea that he just pointed this out as an academic, and he got turned into this lunatic. But then him and myself and other researchers figured out the same thing happened in China. The Chinese people worship Fuxi, this androgynous, amphibious, half human, half fish-like creature. And I have images of it, him, her, whatever you want to call it, on the old Chinese tombs. Then Viracocha in Peru is amphibious, androgynous, and there's all these statues with fish scales and fish tails. He creates the giants. He creates humans. Oannes in Samaria shows up out of the sea and teaches the arts of civilization. Olokun in West Africa. You can't believe the entire world is littered with the same depiction of these beings. They're all androgynous. They're all extraterrestrial amphibious beings who teach the arts of civilization, including Samaria, where we have advanced civilizations that understood math, geometry, trigonometry. In Egypt, Isis and Osiris. Well, I know I'm getting long with it. I really want to be specific here and to show you that this isn't just some
that's fine.
Diluted fantasy.
Yeah,
Isis and Osiris are also these amphibious beings. At the temple of Edfu, what is it? I'm sorry. It's the building text. They're written on the temple of Edfu. I've been there 3 different times. It says that the Ennead are androgynous gods on the temple text right on the wall. So all these sources all around the planet are saying the gods that showed up are all hermaphroditic amphibious beings. They're all brother and sister. They're all husband and wife. Fuxi and Nuar in China, Viracocha and his wife. It's like, whoa. And then you realize, why did the humans try to keep the bloodlines going? Like the brothers and sisters getting married in the pharaonic dynasties in Egypt, and they did it in Peru, and they did it in other places. So this entire mythological tale comes together when you realize that it apparently looks like humans were not a matter of natural evolution. There was genetic intervention, just like all the Sumerian texts talk about. And I hope, like I said, that clarifies the traditional oral tradition, religious document kind of sense of what has gone on in the past. And an academic would say that, I just took 10 hits of acid and I'm out of my mind. And I would say that, in fact, Carl Sagan is the one who said that these myths of amphibious gods showing up and teaching humanity need to be investigated more. And I've taken him up on that offer for the last 25 years or so. And it ties in with the story of giants as well.
So they came in, if I'm trying to get this straight. So they came in and there were certain humans that they genetically modified. Not everybody got that.
No, I think it sounds like it wasn't that there might have been some dead end experiments, possibly like Denisovans and Neanderthals or Homo habilis, and that they altered them, and then humans emerged as something else. I'm not entirely sure. The traditions just basically state that humans are a byproduct of genetic intervention. It's like in the Bible, it's the clay and blood and genetic material. It's the same thing in the Quran. It's the same thing in Peru and other places. Like all the gods that I just mentioned, they specifically create humans with clay and earth and genetic material. And it sounds like, it's like a blend of some extraterrestrial amphibious creature and one of the primate species on Earth. None of us have a time machine, but the traditions clearly state that humans are a byproduct of this kind of genetic intervention. And humans are the fucking weirdest creature anyways, you know what I mean? If you look, some doctor wrote a book about it, like there's all kinds of things like our sensitivity to the sun. It seems like we're on the wrong planet, I got to say, for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, it's
so here in North America, then, some of these civilizations, obviously we think they migrated across the land bridge from China and Russia and stuff, and that's where the giants that you're discovering and uncovering came from. Then, right? I mean, is that what we're to? I mean, that's what we gotta believe, right? That they're descendants of those. So if
no, I'm going to say you're leading the witness in a good way. That because the end results of this is that all the mystics, Edgar Cayce, Rudolf Steiner, Madame Blavatsky, Plato, the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, oral traditions around the planet all say that Atlantis was an actual continent in the middle of the Atlantic that was destroyed in a cataclysm roughly 13,000 years ago. And I will say now that the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, if you follow Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock, it's basically been scientifically verified by an international team of scientists called the Comet Research Group that a cataclysmic, almost planet-killing event happened 13,000 years ago, right when Plato said Atlantis sank. So this destruction in the Great Flood essentially has been verified by science. And a couple months ago, child's footprints in New Mexico were found in the mud with grass seed embedded in them. So they have the exact specific date of 23,000 BC, which blows up the Clovis barrier. So I've been harping on this, and Graham Hancock and others, that humans were certainly in the United States much earlier than the land bridge date of 13,000 BC. So now we have incontrovertible proof of that existing as well. Plus, we have sites like Karahan Tepe and Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, which are the most massive megalithic sites in human history, but they're also at least 12,000 years old, which is another mind-bending scientific find that's been unfolding. So all these scientific points of evidence are showing us that this idea of a lost world in an advanced civilization is highly probable at this point. So the idea is that actually extraterrestrial intelligence is founded. That's what is said about this continent in the middle of the Atlantic. Like, we reside alongside Aboriginal groups and indigenous people in the rainforest with cell phones and skyscrapers. There were like Paleolithic people, Solutreans, Clovis people that coexisted aside a highly advanced civilization 50, 200,000 years ago. And this civilization is the engineers, the Prometheus-like genetic creators who are highly advanced from an extraterrestrial civilization, and whose influence eventually spread around the world as they, taught the arts of civilization and were genetic creators of the human race. That is like the alternative view of what took place there. And Edgar Cayce specifically states that giants and little people were part of the population of Atlantis, and they spread across the world. And the giants showed up in the British Isles after the flood. The giants showed up. Sometimes they were malevolent, like the Native Americans talked about these ancient wars with these giant people. And there was also the tall ones, like the benevolent teachers who showed up, the shamanic class. So there's, and once again, if an academic heard my 20-minute diatribe there, they would, portray me as out of my mind rather than, objectively analyzing the traditional evidence that indigenous people actually talked about and wrote down or transmitted. This is what they thoroughly believe. I have lots of friends who are Zuni and Hopi wisdom keepers. I've sat in ceremonies, ayahuasca ceremonies in South America with my indigenous friends and stuff. And they tell me the same specific story about the creation and the nature of what has gone on in Earth.
Hey, like, we have talked about this before, like when you talk about the little people, about how in Europe, especially, where the trolls, the fairies, the gnomes, everybody thinks they're myths or folklore. Okay. Well, where did it come from? It came from because those things actually existed, if they still don't exist today. And that's what the people were talking about. Like, it's not some, CGI, science fiction. Like, people thousands, hundreds and thousands of years ago weren't just making up science fiction stories. They weren't J.R. Tolkien. Wasn't around.
We got too many people that too many different cultures acknowledge their existence.
Yeah, and have the same, like you said, the same kind of the flood story, the creation story. It's so similar across the world. And
absolutely, that's a great point. That you have these traditions that are very remarkably similar, especially like on isolated Pacific islands. Kiribati, you have an anthropologist, I.G. Turbot, who showed up in the 40s, and he lived with the Onamine, the elders there. And there are giant footprints in the rock there with 6 toes. And he wrote a book about it. This is a mainstream anthropologist in the 40s. And there's pictures in his book I have in my PowerPoint presentation. Like, the old guy's foot is in this, footprint that's like 7 times his size. And they said this is the time the giants lived here, and they had 6 fingers and toes. And then the giant in the Bible of Gath has 6 fingers and toes. And then the giant of the place of emergence in Botswana has 6 fingers and 6 toes. And the entire globe, I do an entire 1-hour talk. It could be like 10 hours, where I show slide after slide of places I visited all around the earth with giant hand prints and giant toe prints of 6 fingers and 6 toes. And the traditions of the indigenous people state that. The indigenous people, they would choose, like, oftentimes women, young girls, to transmute and transmit their oral traditions because they were so important. So it's not like our society where you write out a bunch of statistics. It's given in these stories that are remembered. Like if you hear Native American stories, you're like, well, that's a fanciful child's tale. It's like, no, they're often correct portrayals of geological activity and accounts of things that occurred, but they're couched in a different kind of way so they can be transmitted to the population. But you're absolutely right. The idea, I think there's a strange interface with another reality, a multidimensional interfacing, which is happening here when you get into the realms of like little people and stuff like that. But I also believe there's a hard and fast reality. I'll quickly say that in 2003, on the Isle of Flores in Indonesia, anthropologists discovered a 3-foot-tall human relative called the Hobbit. And in fact, at first they thought it was island dwarfism because of the isolated characteristics of Flores Island. They thought everything shrunk down, like the mini mammoth and all the humans. But then they found 900,000 years ago, an even smaller contingent came out of Africa and moved over to the Isle of Flores. And then the Denisovans are this human cousin that was found in 2007 at the Denisova cave in Siberia. And the only evidence they had for the longest time was teeth that are so massive that they thought they were the teeth of cave bears. They sent them to the Max Planck Institute to be DNA sequenced, and they found out that they were a human cousin that mated with humans and Neanderthals over 40,000 years ago. And about 6 months ago in China, they found a dragon man skull, a Denisovan skull, which is absolutely enormous, which is at least 146,000 years ago. So the idea that all our ancestors were small creatures is not true. We have very small human cousins and very large human cousins that have been verified by science. And I'll come around to your point of oral traditions all around the world lay out the same case that is so beyond coincidence. You have to engage in cognitive dissonance to not look at it objectively and say this has to have some ring of truth. Yeah, and I feel and science doesn't do that because it's transformed itself into an atheistic cult. And I'm not anti-science at all. I love science, but basically every scientist friend of mine, they're more afraid of ayahuasca than they are of Atlantis. You know what I mean? That the scientists of old, they were like Pythagoras and Plato. They were all masters of metaphysics. They all were like spiritually oriented. They had a holistic viewpoint of reality. You know what I mean? They weren't just like super hyper isolated on one aspect. So to the larger point, I like to look at the holistic and the more, a multidisciplinary approach to these problems. I feel within that zone is where the answers lie.
Well, and it's funny you say that, but you don't, like, today, us in society, we wouldn't know unless you go back and you read what was going on 150 years ago. But that's what society was like. It was more spiritualistic. It was more holistic. It wasn't until seemingly like the last it's probably been like 120 years ago that science became a rigid, hard fact. This is how we're going to explain things. And
that's not the way science is supposed to be.
No.
I mean,
absolutely.
You got the scientific method proves science. And you can't just say, well, this is the way it's going to be. This is science. No, we followed the scientific methodologies in order to increase our knowledge on the subject. And it's like they don't want to do that anymore.
I completely agree. And like I said, it's just like a dogmatic cult. And it's not so obvious that the cognitive dissonance is going on. And it's on both sides too, because I'm sure you guys have encountered people who are utterly unhinged because there's no guardrails and they live in an ecosystem of conspiracies that have no basis in reality. and they're immune to logic and reason.
We've had a couple. We've had a couple.
Yes, we have.
But you're right that the scientific method is where it's at, and that hasn't been followed. In the late 1800s, there was this war against religion and science, and science obviously won. Although, the way that religion was constructed, there's a lot of flaws, but there were a lot of what you would call religious ideas that align with esoteric ideas and oral traditions of indigenous people that ring true and have validity, like the idea of a great flood. It's been verified by science. The idea of giants having some kind of reality, and the genetic anomalies like polydactylism having some basis in reality as well. So basically science threw out 10,000 years of oral traditions, right? And then you couple that with the destruction of the Maya codices and the Library of Alexandria, and then we've been stumbling around the dark like the freaking Middle Ages, even with our advanced science. And we have scientists who are male-dominated, left-brained thinkers who have abandoned the metaphysical side of life, the quest to understand what the fuck we're doing on this planet, what the nature of the soul is, all these larger questions, and to have an intuitive sense of what is right and to follow your gut. That's all been abandoned for the most part. So no wonder why we're in the shitstorm we're in, because we've abandoned logic, insanity, and reason for a cult of proving you're right. And that doesn't even follow the freaking scientific method 9 times out of 10,
No.
Well, and I think what gets lost is just because we have more technology today, it doesn't mean the people that are doing the thinking and doing these processes and trying to discover we're not smarter than Plato and Aristotle or any of this. I mean, those people were probably a lot smarter than anybody walking around today. It's just that they didn't have, having Twitter and Facebook and stuff doesn't make you smarter. It actually dumbs us down.
Of course. Yes.
Yeah.
Opposite effect.
Yeah. But they did have a different mindset though. They had a different mindset than what we have today. And it really appears that the powers that are controlling things today don't want us to explore certain topics because for some reason it doesn't maybe jive with their narrative or whatever, but they don't want us to go down that. They want to control what's going on.
There was more people like Jim.
Yeah.
Okay. Back, I think.
Oh, absolutely.
I think back, there's more people like Jim thinking outside the box, doing their own
That's why I'm 100% for what he's doing. I love it.
I've almost heard every one of our listeners probably pull over in their car or stop what they're doing and like, geez, I better get a pencil and a piece
I
of
got to
paper
get
out.
this guy.
I gotta start writing.
Absolutely.
Writing down. This is like a smorgasbord of stuff to go just like, there's probably 200 research topics just alone in this first
40 minutes.
No kidding.
Yeah, it's funny because so much of this ties in together. And I've been at this for like 35 years. I started in my mid-teens. I read, and I don't want to talk up my game. I'm a believer in actually like immortality of the soul and reincarnation. Like my movie character this time around is like the freaking Rain Man. Like I can't take care of my basic needs. I got plenty of weaknesses, but I can download massive amounts of information. I, in fact, had a traumatic brain injury when I was playing football, and I had the seizure disorder that I got from it, a really bad, intractable one that I cured from doing ayahuasca and psilocybin ceremonies, like long ceremonies for weeks and months in the rainforest. Healed it. So for like 20 years, I haven't taken any medication. I have no auras. So it's a cool, side story to that. But I started like reading all the non-dualists like Lao Tzu and Buddha, the Upanishads. And I'm in high school, and I don't even know why. I just was compelled to read Rudolf Steiner and Alice Bailey and Madame Blavatsky and the Rosicrucian and Freemason literature and on and on and on. And I've been at it for like 35 years and trying to piece together a story like a holistic narrative about what's going on in this planet, what is the nature of reality, where the universe of time and space came from, but what occurred here in the past. And I wasn't, once again, anti-science. It just didn't ring true. The evidence didn't line up. I spent so much time with people who were indigenous people who studied and transmitted their oral traditions. And I just found that the societies had so much more integrity. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and our society is such a whorehouse of Elon Musk's, and it's like Vegas, our entire Western culture.
We've turned into one big fake.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Right. I agree with you. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And even in the ancient mysteries world, I know plenty. There's so many bullshit artists and grifters, and I work with the networks, and they don't want the truth. They want dry humps and false promises to the audience, which we don't accept and we fight with all the time. And so we have, a bankrupt culture, and it's good to admit that. And it's just like, and I'm not talking my game up, but I will say that I live in a 10 by 14 cabin on my friend's property. I have no possessions. I'm like a freaking monk. I basically, stonework pays all the bills, and and nobody got their hooks into me. You know what I mean? I don't have an agenda. I'm say spiritual, but not religious. I don't denigrate anybody's beliefs, whether an atheist or whatever. I'm not doing this for any other reason than I'm just fascinated by the truth. And I feel like people who've explored the areas that I am exploring get denigrated and marginalized as like anti-scientific and naive and gullible people. And I try to make coherent arguments to dismiss that idea, but at the same time saying that you got to take these subjects on a case-by-case basis and evaluate them objectively. So somebody could say, that guy's out of his mind. But I think a lot of people would say, maybe he's not right. Maybe I don't agree with him, but I don't feel like this guy is uninformed or has ill intent, if you know what I'm saying.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, they could say you might be crazy, but at least you are an expert in your crazy. You know what I'm saying? I mean, they can't say that you do not know what
they
it
can't
is
just
you are
dismiss what you're saying as nonsense as much as they would like to. Yeah. I'm sorry, but they can't.
Yeah.
I'll tell a quick story. I got a friend, Dr. Andy White, who's a skeptic and a teacher of anthropology, who he moved to Illinois, his family, but I taught or I presented at his anthropology class at the University of South Carolina 2 times in the last couple of years. And my last presentation was about these amphibious fish, human-like beings who showed up all around the world. And the students loved it. And it was funny. And I took all these questions. I did a presentation for like an hour. I showed all the images, all the literature, all the accounts. And then I took questions for like an hour. And Andy and I would take long walks in the state forest and talk about these subjects at end. And, he's skeptical, but he's not like a dismissive asshole. We're like friends and we discuss this. And I understand how science works, so we can like talk about DNA testing and things like that. Right. But basically, he could not come up with a dismissive argument for it. He's just like he calls me like the fish god guy now and stuff. But he really and truly, and the kids in the classroom, if I had to put them in front of a lie detector, they would probably say, there seems to be reality for this incredibly bizarre story. And I think if most people, like I do these presentations at conferences, I got to say, for an hour and a half or 2 hours of accounts, scientific evidence, slides, verification, most people who are open-minded are like, holy hell, there is a story here. I don't know what it is. Maybe you don't have everything in place, but there is no way to dismiss this rationally. That's what I feel.
Well, okay, so I've been writing down a couple questions here that I definitely want to run by you. So when we talk about the existence of giants in North America, do you believe they are somewhat tied to the Native Americans, like they belong, like each tribe or each culture had these giants, or were they the beginning of each of these different tribes? Is that something that you have thought about or considered?
Well, there's two stories basically that occur. And one is that probably the late Pleistocene, from 12 to 15,000, 20,000 years ago, many native tribes say that there were giants who were cannibalistic, who would attack their people. There's great stories where Buffalo Bill Cody, he has a thigh bone that's absolutely enormous, and the native chief is telling him about these giants who would basically be able to capture buffalo by themselves and take them down. They were so enormous, and that they were often portrayed as having red hair and sometimes 6 fingers and 6 toes. There's petroglyphs all over Baja California, with one tribe shooting arrows at another tribe, and one tribe has 6 fingers and toes and the other has 5 fingers and 5 toes, and the ones with the polydactyly are giant size. There's all kinds of interesting bits of evidence around that. But then there was the idea that there were wisdom bringers who showed up, the tall ones, the giant shamans and the wisdom keepers, who are the ones you found buried in the burial mounds all around the United States.
Okay.
I'm sure you're familiar with all the burial mounds. You're in Ohio.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
so
we have
Miami's
Cyrus, actually.
Right, exactly. Miamisburg, right? In Miamisburg, I have an account from 1897. This is just to, kind of solidify this point. They unearthed an 8.5-foot skeleton. Anthropologists all around the world, they come and they examine it. They're astounded by the size. It's listed in some of the largest giant skeletons ever found. Thomas Wilson, head of anthropology for the Smithsonian in the 1890s, he comes, he verifies the find. He calls it remarkable. It's all written down. I have a hand-drawn picture of the skeleton laid out. And the same year, renowned paleoanthropologist, his name's escaping me, it'll come back to me, but the head of the Carnegie finds an 8.5 to 9-foot skeleton at McGee's Rocks Mound in in Pennsylvania. So you have an 8.5 and basically an 8.5 to 9-foot skeleton verified by the heads of the most highly regarded scientific institutions the same year in 1897. I documented in my book. I talk about my presentation, and it never gets talked about. Like, are you kidding? How can these things fall through the cracks? You're measuring a stationary object, that anybody, if you guys measured a femur bone and it was, 29 inches long, you said, holy shit, that's a 9-foot skeleton. In fact, in 1873, the Smithsonian Ethnology Report, and Thomas W. Perrin is an archaeologist who unearthed in Alton, Illinois, a 36-inch skull. The circumference was 36 inches.
Oh my
so that's got, right?
Yeah.
And along with other skulls. But what happened was they crumbled to dust after it was exposed to the air. And the 44th annual report of the Smithsonian, Augustus Mitchell in Georgia, Amelia Island, Florida, unearthed an over 7-foot skeleton with double rows of teeth, a third set of teeth growing in one of the jaws. Yeah. This is a physician, by the way. And he said that the skull was giant. He put it up in front of him and it crumbled away after the atmosphere hit it, right? So this is in the Smithsonian's own accounts that a lot of these skeletons did not, some of them were put on display and analyzed and stuff, but oftentimes they crumbled to dust. The moral to the story is that the Native Americans, it seems that their leaders oftentimes were giant-sized, and they have these oral traditions, just like in England and other places, that there was a cannibalistic tribe that they warred with, just like in the Bible. And I'll quickly say that Viracocha in Peru, he creates the giants. They become cannibalistic assholes who are unruly, and he sends the flood to destroy them, just like in the Bible. It's like, how can the same story from thousands and thousands of years ago on Lake Titicaca in the Bolivia-Peru border say the same thing as the Bible? And Albina shows up. She's one of the founders of Britain, and she has sex with these demonic entities called the incubi and creates a race of giants, right?
Yep.
And the same thing, you're right. So there's all this supernatural genetic freak show shit going on that's highlighted in these religious documents, in the Sumerian texts, in the Bible, in the oral traditions of Peru and other places. So it's like, what is really going on here? There seems to be, it's like dark magic or these malevolent genetic manipulation or something. There's like a freak show sci-fi story of our past that if you talk about it, you get regarded as anti-scientific. But I think that's the wrong approach.
Which is straight. Okay, which is strange because, like you said, in the Bible it talks about the giants and the Nephilim and the same. So you would think that it would be way more mainstream because everybody's always trying to support the Bible scientifically. Right. Okay,
but they want to forget about all the stuff that's in the Old Testament that's talked about.
But I mean, they want to okay, we found the site of this, we found the site of that, we found these artifacts that prove
the chimera and things of that nature.
Yeah, and so why are they poo-pooing? And I know it's not entirely scientific, but you do have scientists trying to find stuff, archaeologists and such. To try to prove the stuff in the Bible. Mm-hmm. So
there are 23 different accounts of giants in the Bible. There are different whole rate. Rephaim. There's I think it's Zamzuman. There are these tribes of giants who are listed. Moses sends out scouts to check out these lands, and they come back and describe that they were grasshoppers in the sight of these giants. And once again, the giant of Gath has 6 fingers and 6 toes. There are many specific mentions of giants. The Og of Bashan, his bedstand has him at like 13 foot 6 inches tall. So you have that, and you talk about the chimeras. Edgar Casey, the sleeping prophet, who gave all these medical readings, he actually talked about, he went into this trance-like state, and he was a conservative Christian. So he was very disturbed by what came back through his trance-like readings. He basically interfaced with the Universal Akashic Library, he said, where he would go into this dimension of the library of existence, and he would read from it. It was really interesting. But what he found was, or what he transmitted was like reincarnation being a reality, these lost civilizations existing like Atlantis, and he got into the readings and the literature that were presented from his astral travels, if you will. He said that in Atlantis, they were hybrid creatures that were created. They were genetically created. Mm. And many traditions also say the same thing. And that, in fact, in Assyria and Egypt, all of the temple walls, you see these weird chimera-like creatures. You have the Minotaur, and in Greek mythology, basically all these cultures have this belief in these hybrid beings. And they say after the flood, these creatures basically escaped or came along with survivors of this lost continent. And that could be the Bigfoot creature that some people seek out. So there was genetic intervention to create like all these, this zoological nightmare of different forms. Because if you landed on this planet and you went all around the world and you saw temples like the Temple of Bellows littered with these beings that are like, have hooves and human heads and tails, you'd be like, what is this? It's utterly dismissed, but all the traditions state that they are a byproduct of ancient genetic engineering. So that ties in the Bible specifically they talk about lion men in the Bible and these other beings. Yeah. And the Old Testament is like an acid trip, if you, it's
yeah. That's one way of putting it. Yeah.
So the moral of the story is all these traditions are talked about. In fact, 3 years ago, once again, in Winterbourne in Kent, in England, they found evidence that ancient Britons believed in they had a hybrid burial where they took a bunch of animal parts and put them together to constitute a hybrid creation. This isn't like, BBC News or something. This isn't like this is a frontline story, a scientific finding. Basically, the ancient Britons had the same beliefs as the Egyptians and the Peruvians and these other cultures of these hybrid beings having, validity in the past. So you once again add that layer to giants, little people, floods, advanced civilizations, lost lands, 6 fingers and toes, on and on. Androgynous fish people showing up to teach the arts of civilization. And then you start to get to a point you're like, I cannot believe how many points of evidence exist in these geographic locations that had no contact for thousands and thousands of years. It is so beyond coincidence. I feel like I'm taking crazy pills because I am the one that's being told that I'm out of my mind, if you know what I'm saying.
Well, all you just did was really provide more talking points on, okay, what is Dogman? Or like you said, what is Bigfoot? The stuff that we really talk about on the show a lot from eyewitnesses. And in fact, one of our members who's not here with us tonight, the judge, who's an actual judge here in the county, had a Dogman experience when we were in high school. And he knows what he saw. I mean, he's a very respected and reputable person. And this just ties into like what you're saying, like these creatures at one time it was commonplace for them to roam the earth. And
absolutely.
And why couldn't they still be somewhere, or part of what's going on today?
Oh, definitely. I mean, you can't rule it out.
No, not at all. The thing is, you have the Yeti, you have like thousands of years ago, you have traditions of the same creature that's been, Native American tribes, they have like, a million different names for the Sasquatch out west. It's like the natives were seeing this, were they seeing swamp gas or whatever for thousands of years?
Well, nobody questions the cave paintings of them seeing buffalo, them seeing wolves, them seeing, the different
flying objects.
They never question the stuff that we accept. But then if there's a picture of a Bigfoot type creature, they're like, oh, that was just their imagination. Well, okay, were they imagining? You got to believe they were imagining the buffalo and the coyotes and whatever else. I mean,
you can't just pick and choose.
You can't just pick,
which is what they're trying to do. It's like somebody trying to protect their narrative.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, science is built on a house of sand, and one of the main points of emphasis is that indigenous people are kind of it's portrayed as superstitious and basically, not understanding what they're seeing. Basically that these people somehow are maybe well intentioned, but they just don't understand. They don't have the intellectual.
They're not intelligent as the rest of what we are today.
Exactly, and you're absolutely right that and my point is, not only are people seeing this creature now in abundance, for thousands of years all around the world, the same creature and other creatures, the Mothman. There's another aspect of this. Like there is Manly P. Hall is one of the greatest thinkers in Freemasonry history. And Reagan sat at his feet and would learn from him. I didn't know that until recently. So Manly P. Hall, The Secret of All Ages, read his book if you're interested. It goes through all that stuff. He talks about Atlantis as a place that existed. Let me also say that Ignatius Donnelly wrote about it. He was a congressman. Voltaire believed in Atlantis. Plato, Herodotus. There are 200 post-Platonic references to it. The skeptics say that, Plato was the only one to talk about it. That's not true at all. It was called Aegygia. It was called on the building text in the Temple of Edfu. The land of the primeval ones was the continent in the middle of the Atlantic where the androgynous gods came from. Tolkien, H.G. Wells, they all said that they thoroughly believed in Atlantis. That's why people love The Lord of the Rings, because it's based on Norse and Celtic mythology about a lost world that where these giants and little people and wizards and shit lived. And we are told that we can't deal with reality and we're engaged in escapism rather than we're following our intuitive sense that there is like a science fiction story of the past. Now, science believes in slow and rigid uniformitarian progress. So they could never believe that things were different in the past than they are now. But the traditions state that in the past, things were completely different. And there was a dark and light battle in these ancient lands. That's what Manly P. Hall talks about.
Right.
Where there was dark wizardry and dark genetic manipulation and insidious behavior that seeps through in our movies and these ideas of wizardry and like you see in Lord of the Rings. That was specifically like Sauron and all these beings.
Mm-hmm.
And the Nazis did the same thing. There was this dark occultism. They weren't just a bunch of assholes. They would do these sick rituals that would bring entities who were malevolent and demonic in to assist them. Like the swastika is supposed to, in Atlantean times, it was the symbol of light.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was turned into the crooked cross. So the largest story here is there's always been a cabal of black magicians who have been at a secret war, basically. And that sounds like this grand tale. And I'll quickly tell you that Edgar Cayce talked about the sons and daughters of light versus the sons and daughters of darkness. And the sons and daughters of darkness were led by Belial, right? By Baal, Beelzebub.
Mm-hmm.
And then 3 years after Cayce died, the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in Egypt. And in it, there is an entire book called The Wars of the Sons and Daughters of Light versus the Sons and Daughters of Darkness. And the leader of the Sons of Darkness in that scroll is Belial, which is like WTF in itself. But,
Yeah, right.
Okay. Yeah, because it wasn't like he had read it. He hadn't picked it up.
Oh no, exactly.
Office, that's
the whole thing. It's like, and there's so much of that. Manly PR. I know I'm trying not to be long-winded. I'm trying to reel in this large story, but there are traditions certainly of advanced technology, genetic manipulation, and dark magic. However you want to call it, I don't know if you call it dark science, I would call it, that has created these strange multidimensional forms that seem to be continuing to interface with our reality. Yep. And I don't begrudge anyone. How pissed would you be if you saw a UFO or had an encounter of some creature and then some asshole was telling you didn't see what you saw? You know what I'm saying?
Happens all the time.
Yep.
Yeah. And that's the, and that's kind of why we started the podcast, was to give people a forum to come on and tell those stories so that they felt, it was a safe place.
Yeah, they have no fear of being ridiculed.
Yeah.
That's why we're here to share information and learn from it.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's great because, and that's what I feel like, that's what I do. I look and sound like a guy you place a bet with. I understand that, but I do my homework. I work with professionals. I've organized archaeological digs. I've produced and ran, $1 million an episode show, series of shows. I'm not incompetent. I do my homework and I try to display that it's okay. And in fact, you want to do this shit, Mm-hmm. I can't tell you, I did weeks and weeks of 17-hour-a-day ceremonies that were completely just mind-bending and just traumatizing. Well, not traumatizing, but like really, really challenging. I've done all kinds of experiments and activities to like push myself and to admit when I'm wrong and self-reflect and teach that to my, my son and people I deal with, to basically disidentify from the separate self, stop taking yourself so seriously and gear yourself towards an evaluation of like, what the hell are you doing in this strange dimension? What is your real nature? What happened in the past? How can all these coincidences not have a basis in reality? And do it in a way that you don't take yourself seriously, but you take your research seriously and you're willing to listen to any side. And I always go to the skeptical side right away and hear the argument and evaluate it. I never exist in a bubble and try to defend myself. I'm like, Okay, no, I'll hear your side. You know what I'm saying. So for you guys to like create a format like that, I think it's a service to people because academics never go in this direction, and when they do, they get steamrolled. Like Robert Temple, one of the most brilliant men I've ever encountered, and he's an academic, and he's considered a nut, like a pseudoscientist. If you go on Wikipedia and you Google Robert Temple and the Serious Mystery, it won't say, one of the most brilliant academics in human history. It'll say he's a crank, So
yeah, they probably defamed him pretty good.
Yes, and that is what people fear. Like they people shitting on you and denigrating you, because it's not just like I disagree with your hypothesis. It's more like they really try to take it out of you, like they're cult members that are closing ranks, and like it's some ideological war. And I'm like, fuck that. That is so infantile and tribal. You
don't even deserve. And you don't even deserve to even talk about a subject that they know about. That you're unworthy.
Yeah, isn't it amazing now how they've moved that to our everyday culture as well? I mean, literally. I mean, that's what this whole cancel culture thing is. If you don't agree with what the mob feels, well, then you're not allowed to have.
It's not even the mob. It can.
Well, the mob is just general people. If you don't agree with everybody, well, then they don't want to just quiet you down. They want to literally destroy you, discredit you, and destroy you.
Yeah. I see the disease in the left and the right. And you can make there's certainly examples of like bad science or bad theories on both sides. But I just feel like everybody's adopted this. I don't want to like get into this too much, but like there's so many of my conservative friends. I'm like, you weren't anti-vax your whole life. That was actually an old left-wing thing. Like my ex is anti-vax for like 30 years, and she's like a total lefty, right? And now like the fucking mask is like a religious sacrament of the left. You know what I mean? Freaking people driving around with masks on and nobody's in the car.
Yeah, in the car by themselves. Yeah, it's
changed. So there's a lot of but I'm not the guy who says that. I'm sure it came out of a lab in China, and who knows if it was like Fort Detrick. We have plenty of these bioweapons all around the planet. Who knows if it was on purpose or whatever? But that doesn't mean that you evaluate the science. It seems like if you get immunized, you probably get a less chance of dying. You know what I mean? So do your own science. But basically, like I vote, and that's the end of my political discourse, because you will never ever change anybody's mind, and it's all tribal bullshit. It's not objective analysis anymore.
You're right.
And like cancel culture is another example too. It's like when we were kids, you could fucking say anything about anybody, and it wasn't even like it was bad natured. It was just language. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And you're expressing yourself.
Well, it's like you said though before, in the neighborhood where you grew up, you had the right to say whatever you wanted to about somebody, about anything, but you also had the right to take a butt whooping. Okay, now you can say whatever you want across cyberspace, and people get all get upset, and
you don't get a butt whooping for
there's no repercussions.
No repercussions at all.
I'll tell a story.
Except our buddy Tim Lovelace, every time he does something on cyberspace, he gets taken off of Facebook. He'll like that.
I'll tell a quick story about technology. Rudolf Steiner was this great mystic. He talked about Atlantis existing. He was like Voltaire. He was a seminal thinker. He came up with the biodynamic system of gardening. There are Steiner schools like the Waldorf school that exist everywhere. I, in fact, studied with somebody who studied with Steiner in the 80s. His name was John Gardner. He was super old when I met him. But anyways, Steiner said that there was a dark force called Ahriman. Now, in Zarathustran theology, actually, Ahriman is a dark entity as well. But what Ahriman represents is cold technology. So my friends who studied Steiner in the 80s and the 90s, we were prophetically trying to Steiner predicted that a cold and dark technology would overtake humanity, but it wouldn't be thrust upon humanity. It would be willfully accepted and wanted. And at first we didn't know what it would be. We thought we would joke and say, oh, it's the fucking helmet. Everybody's gonna put the helmet on, right? Or it'd be like some TV that you could never turn off in your house or something, you know? But then we came around to, it's going to be something that everybody gravitates towards and wants to accept. And that is the phone, the iPhone. Mm-hmm. And when you get on the fucking iPhone, it takes your consciousness to like the 40th lowest level of the Denver airport, where there's a bunch of aliens and some,
that's very true.
Some generals there, you know, doing a software program to you. It has this insidious effect of basically dehumanizing you, causing like a callous drug addict's disposition that is addicted to the hits, the dopamine hits from posting, from liking, from outrage. Everybody's addicted to outrage. So everybody's preferences have been weaponized by this technology, this dark technology, and everybody is helpless, hopeless, agitated, like never before. Not like when we were kids, you know, growing up in the 70s and 80s and getting drunk and going, you know, breaking their houses, whatever they're doing, you know, just like this.
Well, you did lifestyle. Grow up in a rough neighborhood.
But I did do nice stuff till I go fishing.
By the way, all our apologies to people listening to this podcast on Apple Podcast. So don't.
You're in the grips of Satan's technology. Sorry.
Yes. Keep on the dark side, please.
Yeah. I know you guys can at least entertain this idea. And I always felt like, you know, I saw it coming. It was basically predicted by this brilliant seminal thinker. And it's played out just like I thought it would. And he predicted it would, because I'm not on social media. I had a Facebook account, but I shut it down a long time ago. I'm like in the witness protection program of Ancient Mysteries. And I just found it like, even when they had a show, I felt like I was a coke addict when I would post anything. It was always like I was looking for a hit. I was looking for attention. Oh, you know what I'm saying? It was just an unsavory experience. And I feel like if people step back and realize how addicted they are and they put the phone down, it's just like sitting on the table and stare at it for 4 hours and then realize why you want to go back and get another drug hit. And it's just like, you know, you get this feeling like, oh, I just want to check my post, or I just want to, and you really viscerally try to explain that. And it all boils down to, it's an anonymous dopamine hit.
Yes.
And they found that about Instagram and fucking up teenage kids' brains and stuff. Mm-hmm. You're pumping dopamine like you're a hospice patient with a morphine pump. And the side effect is you feel soulless and agitated and disconnected eventually. So it's really something to think about. And I swore off I just got this phone here. My brother bought me this burner. I don't even have a phone.
Oh, jeez. I was going to say, now as I go to do the Instagram post for this episode next week, I'm going to think, God, Jim is somewhere just shaking his head going, don't do it, man. Don't do it. Now, so before, and I will add, the worst thing I ever did, and I held off for as long as I could, was get my daughters a smartphone.
Yeah.
You know, and like they were like maybe in 8th grade, and and I did not want to do it because I knew what it was going to do. And it did that, you know, it did that. It everything that you just described, it had a hand in, you know, affecting how their relationships were with people rather than forming them on an organic, personal level. There's a lot of stuff that's not real.
Yeah, it shuts them down.
Oh,
it really does.
No, totally. It's Bill Belichick. It's like people are concerned about these people they don't even know instead of like their real friends. You know what I'm saying? It's like, well, and can you imagine being like a teenage daughter now? You know, talk about all the insecurity you got to deal with in a fucked up society. Yeah. You know, before technology. Now it's like, I got a son. I have an adopted son. I took in. He was like severely abused and neglected when he was 3 years old, and I was like the loving drill sergeant where I didn't allow him to have all the shit of society until the bitter end, until he got to be like 19 years old and he left the house, because I wanted to give him a slice of life that wasn't like a drug-addled, search for external search for reality, which leads nowhere. And I think now that he has lived with technology and he has a point of reference, he can reflect back to the golden age where it didn't exist in his life and gravitate towards that. And I feel like, us as parents, we have that obligation to try to instill that in our kids so they have this oasis of sanity to go back to, if you will. But it often, kids get in front of screens when they're 2 and 3 years old. And I'm telling you, man, I think our society, I believe in cycles like the Yuga cycles, the ups and downs. I think we're coming out of a bottom. But I do think that technology is going to have like a kind of a dark and depressing effect on this current generation for the next couple of decades.
Oh yeah, we'll be experiencing it, like you said. Yeah, probably about for the next generation.
Yeah, because we're going to be the last generation that had completely grown up with nothing.
Right.
And and like you said, we have that frame of reference, that point of reference we can go back to and realize what was really the good old days.
Somebody's tuning in right now. And it's like, I thought these fucking guys were going to talk about giants.
Well, I tell you, Jim, this has been one of the best episodes. He told you that we were 200 episodes in. This has been one of the best episodes of those 200. And he was trying to push to get you on here for so long, and it's like it has been worth it.
You question me as the
it has been well worth it.
Well, I went before we let you go. I do want to ask one question. Like, so what do you see as the next thing that you are going to tackle, or what do you hope to bring to light through your study and just drive to bring this stuff out? Excellent question.
We just finished second. Hugh Newman and I. Hugh's my buddy. He's on Ancient Aliens all the time. He's the English guy, and he was on a couple of my shows. And we just finished our second book, The Giants of Stonehenge in Ancient Britain. I'm working on a book right now that basically tells the story of what I've been talking about, of these strange hybrid beings that carry these man bags all around the world. The androgynous nature of the gods who created humanity. I feel like, once again, I engage in comparative analysis. So I don't have like, oh, I'm this guy or that guy. I look at all the ancient sources, all the visual evidence, and I piece together the story rather than basically hypothesizing myself. So I think people like that, where they just like it's source after source after source. So I'm writing a book to tell that story, and I'm working on a documentary about the Lost Hall records in Egypt. Now, Edgar Cayce stated that the Great Pyramid of Giza and the complex itself was not built in 2650 BC, but rather from 10,490 to 10,390 BC. And from survivors from Atlantis. And you say, oh, that's a far out story. Once again, I'll reiterate, the building texts on the Temple of Edfu say that the Ennead, the original 9 gods, were all androgynous, and they came from a lost land, the land of the primeval ones, in the middle of the Atlantic, destroyed in the flood. That's what it says on the walls of the temple. 3 different times it states that these gods are androgynous, and the 4 matching pairs beyond Atum, Osiris, Isis, on and on. They're all brother and sister and husband and wife, just like Fuxi in China, and they're all androgynous and they're all amphibious, on and on and on. So anyways, I'm piecing the story together, and Cayce stated that there was a lost hall of records under the right paw of the Sphinx, and it contains records of human history, and it will basically lay out history. It will prove the existence of Atlantis. Dr. Robert Schoch, the geologist who redated the Sphinx, who I've sat on panels with him, I've corresponded with him. He found a cavity under the paw of the Sphinx with GPS technology. So I'm trying to get in with my connections with the Egyptian government. And what I'd like to do is do a show that searches for the lost halls of records in real time on the Giza Plateau. I'm making a documentary, an independent documentary about it now. I'm going back to Egypt to meet with my friend Youssef. Me and Hugh were going, and Youssef is an Egyptian stone carver whose father was a wisdom keeper. Youssef Alwan. He's on Facebook and stuff. He's brilliant, and he believes in the lost civilization as well. And so I think the best way to prove this bizarre case that I've been talking about is to obtain records from the past of Egypt and to see who in fact founded that civilization. So that's my thrust, is to move in that direction of proving the case. Because frankly, geologically, it's tough in the Middle Atlantic, where it's nothing but, the Mid-Atlantic shelf and lots of devastation. And I think finding records of the civilization is the way to prove the case, because I can give a lot of evidence, but I can't incontrovertibly prove it until you find the records of the existence of this place. Right.
Do you still have to go through that antiquitous over there, that Zahi Hawass, or did they remove him?
He is not in the same position. I, in fact, spoke with him and Dr. Mark Lerner at the Casey Ancient Mysteries Conference 2 years ago. Now, if you talk about interesting karma in past lives, Zahi Hawass, his University of Pennsylvania law archaeology degree was paid for by the Edgar Casey Foundation out at Virginia Beach.
Oh, wow.
Now, the Casey Foundation collated and supports, all these holistic ideas. He was basically the godfather of holistic medicine, but at the Virginia Beach headquarters, they have all his readings. He talks about Atlantis. He talks about hybrids, past lives. Mark Lerner is an archaeologist, one of the most well-known Egyptologists. He, in fact, in the early 70s, wrote a book supporting he was a Casey guy, and he wrote an entire book that laid out the case that Casey was right and that Atlantis existed. Then he got flipped over to the academic side and became a skeptic. So all these beings are kind of floating karmically in this orbit. And I guess I'm in the mix too, because I always speak at the Casey conference and I study the Casey material. But Zahi Hawass, I know he has a tendency to be an asshole and a blowhard.
Yeah.
I don't think he's covering up evidence. The thing is, the idea of it's a great question, by the way. The idea of a lost civilization is antithetical to the nationalistic beliefs of the Egyptian people. Now, they got screwed over and all their antiquities stolen. And there are certain elements that believe that the argument that I'm making is a racist one. That to say that the Egyptians weren't the founders of this society 12,000 years ago is a racist argument. And I would say, no, it isn't. Because in Ireland, who built Newgrange? If you read the traditions, the 12th day Danin, these magical beings show up and they build all the stone circles and they build all these, structures. And then in Peru, it's the same story. The Viracochas, the giants, these supernatural beings are attributed with the outrageous stonework that you see in Bolivia and Peru and Ecuador. So what I'm saying is that the same types of beings show up around the world. It's not a racist argument. And I work with Egyptians who believe the same story. The only thing I'm saying is that the founding of Egypt is much deeper in antiquity than we think, by a strange race that kind of showed up. Yeah. So there's a lot going on. So Hawass is like anybody who talks about Atlantis or Lost Worlds, he thinks it's a racist attack. So he has no interest in entertaining the ideas, which makes it very difficult. But I would imagine that the Egyptian government and tourism board, they want more. I love Egypt. I got a lot of friends there. We work to uncover the story together. English expats, Egyptian people. So I think it's a kind of cool dynamic, and I hope we can move forward with it and get rid of that old kind of stodgy belief about Egyptology.
Right.
I just want to do better in fantasy football in the next year, and you're trying to find a lost chamber underneath the right paw of the Sphinx to prove
we want answers.
Yeah. I mean, boy. So Jim, tell everybody, because we will keep, I'll keep an ear out, and hopefully maybe you'll send me an email if this TV project gets off the ground and you are actually able to pull that off, because I'm sure our fans would love to watch that. But tell our listeners where they can find your books. On Amazon, I got 2 books with Hugh Newman, Giants on Record, which is the story of giants in ancient America. And if you like this interview at all, I think you'll love the book.
Loved it.
There was so much evidence in there. There was so much specific, incontrovertible evidence in there. And because a lot of people, like if you're into Bigfoot, it's kind of like you're into it, but you feel a little defensive because you're pissed because people run their mouth and try to like marginalize you and make you look like a fool, and you want to knock the teeth out. You know what I mean? So I feel like I try to develop a body of evidence for something that is considered controversial or unattainable scientifically, and make the case that most logical people would say, wow. I mean, I get like bank presidents and network executives like contacting me, over the last couple of years, say, I loved your book. I can't believe how much evidence is there. It's just that the cult of science engages in cognitive dissonance. It's not like an active, I don't want to deal with this. It's more like it just doesn't fit the paradigm. It just doesn't compute.
Right.
It has to be something else, because a scientist would never say, basically the only controversial thing I am saying is that the universe is big enough to have an advanced race that is above us and that came to Earth in the distant past and created humans out of some of the species that were already here. That's the only and then everything.
And I agree with that too. Anybody with common sense, when you look at the vastness of our universe, and you just look at our own Bible, I mean, you got to believe that. You truly do.
Like you go to an old parking lot and the grass breaks through. All this universe does is fucking produce life. It is the most bizarre and infantile. You couldn't stop it if you wanted. There are billions of worlds with life on it, and there are the most freakish creatures all over this acid trip of a universe we live in. And to claim otherwise is like, it's like Galileo under house arrest. It's the earth is flat. I can't believe scientists, they're so smug and like, oh, I might admit there's like some microbes out there or something, because it's like, oh, my friends are going to shit on me at the cocktail party. You know what I mean? Like, it's such a lame argument. It's so antithetical to logic and reason. I can't believe that people adopt it, but whatever. They present a good foil for people like us who are trying to like view these things through a different lens. So anyways, like I said, I got no social media presence, but if you go
I wasn't even going to ask your social medias because I thought we might get struck down by it.
If you go to megalithomania.uk, megalithomania, that's Hugh Newman's site. And our books are there. We do tours. He has his own YouTube channel. So I have a bunch of talks about giants, Edgar Cayce, Atlantis, polydactylism. So I'm also setting up a page, jimvieira.com. It'll be up in a couple of weeks. And what I'm putting all my videos there. But I do a bunch of metaphysical stuff. Like I study the non-dualists, like Ramana Maharshi, all the great spiritual masters. Yep. And I do the same thing with all the enlightened beings throughout history. I do a comparative analysis of what they say about the universe and time and space, what we're doing here, what our true nature is, and they all saying the same specific thing. So I highlight that. I give strategies that I study with my brother, and I study with an enlightened spiritual teacher for the last 25 years, if you can believe that. Actually enlightened being who lives like a half an hour from me, one of the greatest minds in human history. And we've transcribed our sessions for the last 10 years and gained the insight that he's taught us about, you're not a body, you're renting this strange vehicle, disidentify from your separate self and merge with something larger. He gives all these strategies about basically how to holographically view the world and to heal all the unconscious weird shit you have trapped in there through like quantum forgiveness and stuff. So anyways, it's a long-winded way of saying there's metaphysical stuff will be there too, if that's your thing. Because I feel that a lot of people who are into ancient mysteries are asking the same questions. They want more peace in their life. We all have dealt with like really tough traumas and difficulties. And it's good to have an underpinning of philosophy that explains what's going on. Like, oh, what the fuck? Why would God cook up a freak show world like this? Or why would he let people suffer? Or is there a separate being that you would call God? Like, what is going on here? And all those questions are answered by the non-dualists, by the beings who were perfectly enraptured in this blissful state, like Buddha and Jesus and Ramana Maharshi and Gandhi. And you're like, what do these guys get going on? So, but there is a philosophy and a mind training technique that you can do, like Gary Renard teaches in The Disappearance of the Universe, to attain these states. So I will just say that I'm crafting that webpage right now. I get somebody working on it, and I will have videos and instructions and pointers that I've gleaned from 30 years of metaphysical study with this teacher that I've taught with, that I've studied with. And so I just say this because I want to throw out on the internet a clearinghouse of these sources, not only of ancient mysteries and open-minded thinking, but of metaphysical stuff, something I would have wanted to encounter 25 or 30 years ago, because my search, like all of our searches, has been, the road has been very difficult. There's been a lot of doubts, and I cannot answer every question in the universe, but I can lend my confidence about what our true nature is, and that won't waver. You know what I mean? That it may appear that this idiot is talking to you right now, but our real nature is not the bodies that we are in and the personalities that we have. Those are temporary. And once you understand that and experience that, which I have in ceremonies and shit, you lose all doubt in a good way. So I like to, and I'll quickly say, like I said, I have, I had a lot of people in my life, with depression and trauma and difficulty, and a son who really struggled. And so I have a lot of empathy for people who deal with mental illness, and I want to be as supportive and hopefully somebody that people can have confidence in. That I went from a kind of a dark and depressed place with the seizure disorder to one of where I am basically have had no depression or anything like that for many, many years. So nice. Thanks for entertaining that.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, well, Jim, first off, I'm looking forward to the merch selection on your new website, because I can see a shirt that says, "I'm no scientist, I read Jim Vieira."
I would love that. I'd wear that one. I'd wear that. Here's the thing is, Jim, you're welcome on this show anytime. If there's anything we can do to help you get the word out.
He's way too smart, man. If he gets on the show too much, he's taking over.
Well, we be moving in a good direction. Just put it that way. I love it.
Well, Jim, yes, thank you so much for joining us. This was great, and I hope that our listeners, that their minds, because I know their minds are blown. There's so much good information in this time we spent together, and I hopefully people will really go out, get your books, and become fans of yours like we are. So
exactly. I've been made a fan, and I have to get every book he's written now.
Even though he can't read, but he's going to get them.
I can read, believe me. Oh wow, I wasn't expecting that one.
No, I'll say that. Thanks for the kind words. If I think the best way to transmit this information is like, a podcast, or I think it's also like go to Megalithomania. I get a bunch of videos, like my Edgar Casey ones are really good. I think I present all the written evidence, all the documentary evidence. I think if people are interested in these subjects and they see all the images and their minds are open to all these ideas, they'll really enjoy those types of ways to download this information, because sometimes talking it doesn't always do it as well. But I wasn't being a prima donna. I think I lost my old email. Like, I got the tech skills of an Amish preacher. So the moral of the story is that reach out in the future, and I'll be glad to come back on. It wasn't like
we would love that. We would love to have you back anytime. Yeah.
And it's good, and thanks for being open-minded, especially being regular guys. Talking about metaphysical stuff, I like to think I give permission to, say guys who are more blue collar to really entertain these questions and to be honest about how they feel, or if they struggle with fucking depression, or they're having trouble parenting. We've all been in the same boat, and it's healthy to admit when you're wrong and self-reflect, ask for help, and be open-minded. And that's the most important message, I think. These things, these topics are very interesting, but at the end of the day, you want you want to feel comfortable talking about things that are important. And, certainly everybody has fucking mental health problems. You can't believe how prevalent it is. And I can't, like when we were kids, like you were a loser if you cried or if you went to a therapist. It's like you were living on another planet. You know what I mean? Like, so I like to convey that message because, I want people to have confidence to come out and to seek help if they need it, or just to reflect on, we live in a very strange reality here. And I got to say, it's like, we've been dropped behind enemy lines if you want the truth. It is like the Matrix. In fact, the Wachowski brothers, they created the story of the Matrix through the old Gnostic teachings, right? From the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Nag Hammadi scrolls. The old Gnostics were Christian mystics, but they believed that this world is hell, and that and that's what Plato talks about. We believe that the shadows on the world is our real experience, but the light, or the one outside of time and space, is our real home. And we're kind of having a thought experiment, like the sons and daughters in the prodigal son story, right? And the thought experiment is like, what would it be like to be separate, right? So it's like, you're over there, you're in a body, geez, everybody I know dies. And I don't want to get long-winded about it, but that's what all these sources keep telling us about the nature of reality, where the mystical sources, the religious sources, are saying, no, our real state is outside of time and space in a blissful existence. So you undo your false beliefs about yourself and the world to awaken, if you will, right? That's what the masters do. They awaken. The Buddha awakens. And you're like, what does that mean? He stops believing he's a movie character and he is the all, right? So these ideas, that's what like revelation is all about. Or if you do ceremonies, you jump to the finish line and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe this is what I am. And then you jump back and reconfigure into the like strong prison-like belief of the small self, right? I'm this tiny loser with these weird and embarrassing thoughts. But the reality is we are the all. We are this benevolent field of oneness. And I've experienced it. I study with a spiritual teacher who lives in that state all the time, if you can believe it. And all the masters lived in that state. And so I can't convey another message that's kind of more important than, don't worry, don't take this shit so seriously. You cannot believe what you are in reality. And just don't be reactive to the movie as much, and you will find more and more peace in your life. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen.
And if you're Christian, that's what the Christian mystics said, right? The Gnostics, the early Christian, Jesus' teachings are saying exactly that. And the Buddhists said. So it isn't a matter of one religion over the other. Every religion, major religion, had a master who became enlightened. And then the Romans or whoever took that and created like a cultish orthodox religion out of it that really doesn't follow the tenets of the teacher themselves. So Buddhism, Muhammad was the same way. You see how fanatical Muslims are sometimes now. The core beliefs of Muslims are just like, Jesus and the Christians, and just like the Kabbalah and the esoteric sources of the Jewish faith. So get away from the labels. Don't take this fucking place seriously. Right. That's like the greatest message I can give. Like when we're at work, it's just like idiotic jokes. Don't react to the world. Don't be addicted to outrage. The world is healed in your mind because the mind is a projection of yourself, right? Yeah. When you view an object 20 billion light years away, why does it change at the subatomic level? Because it's coming from you. You are the one mind that is splintered into a misperceiving aspect of being in an individual body. But the reality is you are the mind that has created the entire universe. And you think you're a small, insignificant, weird speck of dust. And you see how that can like poison your belief about yourself. if you are the all, there is no there is nobody to basically bow to, if you will, or there is no force out there that is against you. It is basically a self-deluded creation that you can fix, but you fix it not by condemning. Like if I were to condemn you guys, because there was only one mind, all my bad thoughts would come back at me unconsciously. That's like the ultimate message of all these, right?
Yep.
That holographic reality. So, that's the greatest message is like treat others the way you want to be treated, not because you're a fake good guy, because it is a metaphysical principle, a holographic reality. Then you are unconsciously telling about yourself. You are not on the hook for anything you've done. You are living in a virtual reality temporary state. You basically forgive the world through the mind and how you see others. And I say this to tie into everything we talked about. That's why technology is antithetical to that for the most part. Looking for a hit, addicted to outrage, those things really destroy your peace. And hopefully this makes sense for people. And this is what I learned from my teacher, and it's changed my life so much by following these principles. So.
Yep.
I really no. Thanks for indulging me. I feel like I'm a recovering Catholic, so I'm always like, oh shit, am I taking too much time? But I really like that you let me go off on that rant right there.
Hey, listen, that last part. I think that's a good way for everybody that is listening to this episode to spend the rest of their day.
Yeah,
and think about.
It's a good way to end it right there.
And good way to
nothing else needs to be said.
Yeah, good way to spend the rest of the day and some good stuff to think about.
Yep.
Sure. So, but
awesome.
Thanks again, Jim, and it was a pleasure. And I can't wait to hear what people have to say about this.
Yeah, and look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Yep. So we'll be in touch, even on your
awesome.
even though you're trying to hide, we'll be in touch.
I'm definitely trying to hide. No. I as you can see, I'm into it. I'm not like. I'm a freak, but
all I can say is this best episode in over 200 episodes. That's all I got to say. That's the highest praise right there.
Thank you. And it's not like, I'm the big hero once again. Like I said, I can't take care of my basic needs, and I live in a 10 by 14 hut and have no possessions. But I think that these ideas that we've talked about just ring true to people.
Yep.
And that's why you would say something like that, like, this is a really good episode, because we are tapping into the questions that everybody have. Yep. And we're discussing it in a way that makes sense, that rings intuitively true.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you understand Jungian's collective unconscious, we are sharing one mind.
Yep.
So you interface with beings and you bounce off information that's intuitively true to you. So it just like snaps, like when you meet people and you're like, oh my God, I feel like I've incarnated with this being before. Like we keep orbiting in each other's lifetimes through different lifetime after lifetime. And so that's what I feel like. This information, it's like I'll quickly say that the entertainment world and everything like that, it leaves people so high and dry and feeling like, just like none of my questions is being answered. There's no inspirational material here. And the stuff we're talking about, I just think resonates with people. And I hear it a lot. I hear like, wow, that was great. That information really, resonated with me. So I hope your listeners feel the same way.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm sure they will.
Yep.
I'm sure they will. So, all right, Jim, we'll sign off now. And thanks again.
Awesome. Take care, guys, and just reach out anytime.
Yep. Take it easy. Yep.
All right.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the From the Shadows podcast. Until next time, never shy away from the darkness or what may be lurking in the shadows. We are out.
God only knows what's hiding